I was in the middle of closing a $12 million deal when my phone started buzzing on the glossy mahogany conference table. The board erupted in applause as I wrapped up my presentation with confidence. I shook hands, accepted congratulations, and promised to send the finalized contracts by end of day. As Director of Strategic Development at one of Austin's fastest-growing tech companies, this was exactly where I belonged. Only when the heavy oak doors closed behind me did I allow myself to check my phone. 7 missed calls, 3 voicemails. My heart hammered as I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to the first message. Ethan's voice was strained, almost pleading. He needed to talk to me right away. It was about Victoria. Of course it was about Victoria. His older sister had been a looming presence in our marriage since day one. A ghost I could never quite exorcise despite my best efforts. I had met her exactly once at our wedding, where she had arrived 2 hours late in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars swept through the reception like visiting royalty and left before the cake was cut. She had looked at me exactly twice. Both times her expression suggested she had discovered something unpleasant on the bottom of her Louboutin heels. I walked quickly down the corridor toward my corner office, my mind already racing through possibilities. Had something happened to their mother? Was there a family emergency? But the third voicemail dispelled those fears and replaced them with something far more complex. Victoria was coming to Austin, tomorrow. She wanted to have dinner with us to finally get to know me properly after 3 years of marriage. Ethan's voice in that message carried an undertone I recognized immediately. Anxiety, the kind of anxiety that came from years of trying to manage his sister's expectations and inevitably falling short. I called him back as soon as I reached my office, closing the door behind me and leaning against my desk. He answered before the first ring finished. The conversation that followed was one of those moments that changes everything, even though at first it seems like just another compromise, just another small accommodation to keep the peace. Ethan explained that Victoria was having a difficult time. Her latest real estate venture in Istanbul had hit regulatory problems. Her relationship with some Greek shipping heir had imploded spectacularly and publicly. She was feeling vulnerable and defensive, and he knew from experience that when Victoria felt that way, she became hypercritical of everyone around her. I listened already, feeling the familiar weight of anticipation settling on my shoulders. I asked him what exactly he needed from me. There was a long pause, and in that silence I could hear him gathering courage for whatever he was about to say. When the words finally came, they hit me like ice water. He had told Victoria that I worked in an office job. Nothing specific, nothing important, just administrative work at some tech company. He had not mentioned my title, my salary, my accomplishments, or anything that might make Victoria feel threatened or competitive. He said it was easier this way. He said it would make dinner more pleasant. He said he knew Victoria, and he knew how she reacted to successful women, especially women who might outshine her in any way. I stood there in my corner. Office, surrounded by the trappings of success I had worked so hard to earn. My diplomas from MIT hung on the wall. My industry awards lined the shelf behind my desk. The skyline of Austin stretched out before me through floor-to-ceiling windows. And my husband was asking me to pretend none of it existed because his sister could not handle the reality of who I was. The anger that rose in me was cold and calculated, rather than hot and immediate. I had spent too many years in boardrooms and negotiation meetings to let emotion cloud my thinking when strategy was required. I asked Ethan why he thought this was acceptable, why he thought it was reasonable to ask me to diminish myself for Victoria's comfort. He stumbled through an explanation that I had heard variations of throughout our marriage. Victoria had always been the successful one in the family. She had built her real estate empire from the ground up. She had traveled the world. She had connections in every major city. Their parents had always held her up as the golden child, the one who had made something of herself. Ethan loved his sister, but he also knew that her sense of self-worth was fragile beneath all that bravado. She needed to feel superior. She needed to feel like she was still the star of the family. If she met me and realized I was her equal or possibly even more successful in my field, it would create tension that would poison every future family interaction. I asked him if he had considered how it felt to be his wife, listening to him explain why his sister's ego was more important than my dignity. There was another long silence. Then he said something that surprised me. He said he knew it was wrong. He knew he was asking too much, but he also knew that I was strong enough to handle it. I was secure in who I was. I did not need external validation. Victoria, on the other hand, would spiral if she felt diminished. She would make everyone miserable. She would take it out on Ethan, on their mother, on anyone within range. He was asking me to be the bigger person, to take one for the team, to help keep the peace for the sake of family harmony. Part of me wanted to refuse outright. Part of me wanted to tell him that if he could not stand up for me and for our relationship, then we had bigger problems than a difficult sister. But another part of me, the part that had learned to think strategically about problems, saw an opportunity. An idea began forming in my mind, crystallizing with each passing second. If Victoria wanted to meet a simple office worker, then I would give her exactly what she expected. But I would also give her a lesson she would never forget. I would show her exactly who she was beneath all the designer clothes and luxury possessions. I would hold up a mirror and I would make her look. I told Ethan I would do it. I could hear the relief flooding through the phone line. He thanked me profusely, told me he loved me, told me he knew I would understand. I let him believe that I was being magnanimous, that I was taking the high road for the sake of family peace. In reality, I was already mentally planning the most calculated and effective revenge I had ever orchestrated. This was going to be a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Victoria would never see it coming. I spent the rest of the afternoon tying up loose ends at work, delegating tasks to my team, and making sure all urgent matters were handled. I told my assistant to clear my schedule for the next day. When she asked if everything was all right, I smiled and said that family matters required my attention. She nodded knowingly. She had been with me long enough to understand that I did not take unscheduled days off lightly. If I was stepping away from the office, it was for something important. On my drive home, I thought through every detail of my plan. This could not be half-hearted. If I was going to play the role of a simple office worker, I needed to commit fully. The clothes, the mannerisms, the vocabulary, the worldview. Everything had to be perfectly calibrated to seem authentic, while also being just slightly off enough to be subtly irritating. I needed Victoria to feel completely superior and totally comfortable with her assumptions. Only then would the revelation hit with maximum impact. I arrived home to find Ethan pacing in our loft, his nervous energy filling the space. Our home was a reflection of our combined success. Modern furniture, original art on the walls. High-end appliances in the kitchen. Everything spoke of careful curation and considerable income. Ethan looked up when I entered, his expression hopeful and worried in equal measure. He started to thank me again, but I held up a hand and told him I needed to prepare. I asked him to give me the evening to get ready. He looked confused but relieved that I was not angry. He said he would order dinner and give me space. I went straight to our bedroom and opened my walk-in closet. This was going to require careful consideration. I moved past the section where my work clothes hung. Tailored blazers from Theory and Hugo Boss, silk blouses in jewel tones, pencil skirts and tailored trousers, designer dresses for client dinners and board presentations. These were the clothes that communicated competence, authority, and success. These were the clothes that made junior employees straighten their posture when I walked into a room. None of these would work for what I had planned. I dug deeper, pushing past the cocktail dresses and evening wear, past the expensive casual wear I wore on weekends. At the very back of the closet, in a section I rarely visited, I found what I was looking for. These were clothes from my early 20s, from before I had climbed the corporate ladder from community service events and charity runs. A faded pair of jeans with a small tear in one knee, an oversized t-shirt from a tech conference that had happened so long ago, the company name was no longer recognizable, a hoodie from my undergraduate days at MIT, worn soft with age and washing. These were the clothes of someone who did not think about fashion, who prioritized function over form, who had neither the money nor the inclination to dress to impress. I laid out the outfit on the bed and then turned my attention to accessories. My everyday purse was a leather Prada bag that had cost more than some people's monthly rent. That would definitely not work. I searched through boxes on the top shelf of the closet until I found an old canvas tote bag from a public library fundraiser. It was sturdy and practical, and it screamed a complete lack of fashion awareness. Perfect. I set it next to the clothes. Then I removed all my jewelry. The Cartier watch went back in its box. The diamond stud earrings Ethan had given me for our anniversary went into the jewelry case. I would wear nothing tomorrow that suggested wealth or status. The next morning, I woke early and began my transformation. I showered and deliberately used the most basic drugstore products instead of my usual luxury skincare routine. I towel dried my hair, and pulled it into a messy bun without using any styling products. My hair, which usually fell in glossy waves thanks to expensive salon treatments, looked limp and unstyled. I applied no makeup except for a thin layer of basic foundation and some chapstick. In the mirror, I saw a completely different person staring back at me. Without the polish and presentation that I usually brought to my appearance, I looked tired and ordinary. It was perfect. I dressed in the outfit I had selected, taking a moment to appreciate how different I felt in these clothes. The jeans hung loose on my hips. The t-shirt was baggy enough to hide my shape. The sneakers were comfortable but clearly old with scuff marks and worn soles. I looked exactly like someone who had never considered their appearance as part of their professional presentation, someone who had no reason to care about making an impression. I transferred only the essentials to my canvas tote: my phone, my wallet, my keys. I left behind all the other items I usually carried, the things that marked me as a high-powered professional. When I emerged from the bedroom, Ethan was in the kitchen making coffee. He turned toward me with a smile that froze on his face when he saw what I was wearing. His eyes widened. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. Finally, he managed to ask if I was joking. He said I looked like I had just rolled out of bed after an all-night shift at a 24-hour diner. I smiled sweetly and asked if this was not exactly what he had wanted. After all, I was supposed to be a simple office worker. This was what simple office workers looked like, right? Comfortable, unpretentious, not trying to impress anyone. Ethan looked genuinely distressed. He said this was taking things too far. He had asked me to downplay my career, not to dress like I had given up on life entirely. I reminded him that he wanted Victoria to believe I was insignificant. He wanted her to feel superior and comfortable. How better to achieve that than to look the part completely? He tried to argue, but I was already gathering my things. I told him we needed to leave soon if we wanted to be on time. The dinner reservation was for 7, and Victoria did not tolerate lateness from others, even though she herself was chronically late to everything. The drive to the penthouse took 40 minutes through Austin traffic. Ethan spent most of it alternating between trying to coach me on how to interact with Victoria and expressing his doubts about the whole situation. He reminded me that Victoria could be harsh. She did not have a filter. She said what she thought without concern for other people's feelings. She valued success above almost everything else. She had strong opinions about how people should dress, how they should speak, how they should carry themselves. I listened to it all with a calm expression and assured him that I could handle Victoria. What I did not tell him was that I had been handling people far more difficult than Victoria for years. Hostile board members, aggressive competitors, dismissive investors. Victoria was just another challenge, and I was very good at meeting challenges. The penthouse was in one of Austin's most exclusive buildings downtown, the kind of place where the doorman wore white gloves and knew all the residents by name. Ethan had told me that their mother owned this apartment but rarely used it, preferring to spend most of her time at the family estate in Connecticut. Victoria had insisted on staying here rather than at a hotel. She had hired a catering service and a team to prepare the apartment for her arrival. She had even brought in fresh flowers from her favorite florist and new linens for the bedrooms. This was not just a family dinner. This was a stage carefully set for Victoria to perform her superiority. We took the elevator to the top floor. Ethan's hand shook slightly as he pressed the button. I could feel his anxiety radiating off him in waves. I reached over and squeezed his hand, telling him to relax. Everything would be fine. He looked at me with such gratitude and trust that I felt a momentary pang of guilt. He had no idea what I was actually planning. He thought I was being supportive and accommodating. He had no clue that I was about to systematically dismantle his sister's worldview. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. The apartment was everything I had expected and more. Soaring ceilings with exposed beams, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city, marble floors that probably cost more per square foot than most people's entire homes, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design museum, original artwork on every wall, the kind that came with authentication certificates and insurance policies. The lighting was perfect, creating pools of warm illumination that made everything look like it was waiting to be photographed for Architectural Digest. Victoria was waiting in the living room, posed artfully on a cream-colored sofa that probably required professional cleaning after each use. She had dressed for maximum impact, in a floor-length evening gown that shimmered with what I was fairly certain were real crystals hand-sewn into the fabric. Her jewelry was understated in the way that only very expensive jewelry can be understated. Simple diamond studs that probably cost more than a luxury car. A thin platinum bracelet that caught the light with every movement. Her hair was styled in soft waves that had clearly been done by a professional that very afternoon. Her makeup was flawless, accentuating her bone structure and making her eyes seem larger and more luminous. She stood when we entered, and for a moment I got a clear view of the full effect she was trying to create. This was a woman who had spent hours preparing for this encounter. This was someone who needed to establish dominance from the first moment of interaction. She approached Ethan first, air-kissing him on both cheeks in the European style she had clearly adopted during her time abroad. Then she turned to me, and I watched her eyes travel from my face down to my scuffed sneakers and back up again. The journey took perhaps 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, I saw her entire assessment and dismissal of me. I did not give her time to speak first. I rushed forward with genuine seeming enthusiasm, nearly stumbling in my eagerness. I told her how beautiful she looked, how amazing her dress was, how everything in the apartment was so fancy and gorgeous. I reached out and actually touched the fabric of her gown, letting my fingers linger on the delicate material. I asked her if the dress had cost a lot of money, then immediately giggled and apologized for such a rude question. I said I was just not used to seeing such nice things in person. Where I came from, people wore dresses like this only to weddings, and even then they were usually rentals. Victoria's smile became slightly fixed, but she recovered her composure quickly. She had clearly been expecting someone deferential and intimidated. She thanked me for the compliment in a tone that managed to be both gracious and condescending. She said I looked very comfortable, emphasizing the last word, in a way that made it clear comfortable was not a compliment. She gestured toward the dining area, where the table had been set with china so delicate I could see light through the plates. Crystal glasses caught the light like prisms. Silver flatware gleamed against white linens. Fresh flowers in a low arrangement filled the center of the table. It was a tableau designed to impress and intimidate. As we sat down, Victoria took the head of the table naturally, as if it were her birthright. Ethan and I sat on either side of her. A caterer appeared from the kitchen, a young woman in a crisp white shirt and black pants, who explained the menu for the evening in hushed, respectful tones. Victoria had ordered a 5-course meal from one of Austin's most exclusive restaurants. Each course was described in detail, with emphasis on the rare ingredients and sophisticated preparation methods. I listened with wide eyes and made impressed noises at appropriate moments. When the caterer finished, I asked if we were really going to eat all 5 courses, or if some of them were just for looking at. Victoria's smile tightened imperceptibly. The first course arrived something involving oysters and caviar and microgreens I could not identify. Victoria immediately began talking, and I realized that Ethan had been right about one thing. She did not ask questions. She did not express interest in other people. She simply talked about herself, her accomplishments, her possessions, and her experiences. She told us about her apartment in Istanbul, describing the view of the Bosphorus in great detail. She talked about the process of finding the perfect property, the negotiations with the seller, the renovations she had commissioned from award-winning architects. She quoted the final price tag with the casual pride of someone who wanted us to be impressed, but also wanted us to know that such sums were trivial to her. I played my role perfectly. I gasped at the right moments. I exclaimed about how much money that must have been. I asked naive questions that revealed my complete ignorance of the luxury real estate market. When she mentioned that her apartment had 5 bathrooms, I wondered aloud why anyone would need 5 bathrooms. Did she have a lot of guests who all needed to use the bathroom at the same time? Victoria explained with barely concealed impatience that it was about luxury and convenience, about having the space to live beautifully. I nodded as if this was a profound revelation I had never considered before. The second course came and went while Victoria moved on to describing her yacht. It was apparently a modest vessel by billionaire standards, only 40 meters long, but perfectly adequate for weekend trips along the Turkish coast or over to the Greek islands. She showed us photos on her phone, swiping through images of gleaming white decks, luxurious cabins, and sunset views from the bow. I marveled at every image, asking if the yacht could also sail on rivers, or if it was too big. Victoria explained that it was a seagoing vessel designed for ocean travel. I said that was a shame because rivers were pretty too, and it would be nice to be able to use it everywhere, Ethan was barely touching his food. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing between Victoria and me, as if waiting for something to explode. But I was maintaining my character beautifully. I ate with gusto, commenting on how fancy everything tasted, asking the caterer for seconds of the bread, and generally behaving like someone who had never been to a nice restaurant before. Victoria watched me with an expression that mixed amusement and disdain in equal measure. This was exactly what she had expected. This confirmed all her assumptions about Ethan marrying someone beneath his station. The third course arrived, something involving duck and figs, and a sauce that had probably taken hours to prepare. Victoria launched into a story about her recent trip to Dubai, where she had stayed at the Burj Al Arab and gone shopping in the Gold Souk. She described the hotels, the restaurants, the luxury cars that were common as taxis. She talked about the mall where you could ski indoors in the middle of the desert, about the fountain shows, about the view from the top of the Burj Khalifa. I listened with rapt attention and asked if Dubai was the place with the really tall building that looked like it was touching the clouds. Victoria confirmed this, and I said I had seen pictures of it on the internet, and it looked really cool. She moved on to talk about her subscription to the Vienna Opera House, how she tried to attend at least a few performances each season when she was in Europe. She described the Baroque interior of the building, the quality of the orchestra, the social scene during intermission where everyone dressed in their finest and saw and was seen. I told her I had always thought going to the opera sounded fun, kind of like fancy karaoke. The look on Victoria's face was absolutely priceless. She stammered that opera and karaoke were nothing alike. Opera was art, opera was culture, opera was refinement. I nodded and said I understood, but was not it still just people singing in front of an audience? She looked like she wanted to explain further, but could not find words that would bridge the vast gulf of understanding between us. The fourth course came, and with it, Victoria's description of her personal shopper at Bergdorf Goodman in New York. She explained how having a personal shopper meant never having to waste time searching through racks of clothes. Her shopper knew her style, her size, her preferences. She would call ahead before each visit, and everything would be pulled and waiting in a private dressing room. It made shopping so much more efficient and enjoyable. I said that sounded really convenient, and then I mentioned that I did most of my shopping at Target, because they had really good sales, and you could buy groceries at the same time, which saved on trips. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, and she took a long sip of her wine. Throughout all of this, I was carefully watching Victoria, cataloging her responses, noting the patterns in her behavior. She never once asked Ethan how he was doing. She never asked about his work, his life, his happiness. She never asked me a single question about myself beyond the initial greeting. Her entire existence seemed to revolve around broadcasting her success and waiting for others to acknowledge and admire it. She needed constant validation. She needed to feel superior. She needed everyone in the room to recognize that she was special, accomplished, and worthy of respect. It was simultaneously sad and infuriating. Then came the moment I had been building toward all evening. Victoria reached beside her chair and pulled out a shopping bag with Hermes emblazoned across it in distinctive orange. She explained that she had made a quick stop in New York on her way to Austin and had picked up a little something special. She reached into the bag with the care most people reserve for handling newborns and pulled out a Birkin bag. The leather was a rich cognac color, smooth and supple. The hardware gleamed in gold tone. Even I, who had no particular interest in luxury handbags, could appreciate the craftsmanship. This was an object that represented not just money but also status connections and cultural capital. Victoria set the bag on the table between us, positioning it carefully so the light hit it at the most flattering angle. She waited for our reaction, her expression one of studied casualness that barely concealed her pride. Ethan made appropriate appreciative noises, clearly aware that this was a test he needed to pass. I leaned forward, eyes wide, and picked up the bag without asking permission. Victoria actually flinched, but she was too committed to her role as gracious hostess to stop me. I turned the bag over in my hands, examining it from every angle. I ran my fingers along the stitching, felt the weight of the leather, tested the clasp. I told Victoria it was so soft, so pretty, so perfect. Then I asked the question she had been waiting for. How much had it cost? Victoria told me with practiced nonchalance. $12,000. She said it as if $12,000 was a perfectly reasonable amount to spend on a handbag, which to her it probably was. I whistled low and said that was almost what I spent on groceries for a whole year. Victoria's smile became even more fixed. She started to explain that a Birkin was not just a purchase, but an investment, that these bags held their value, that some even appreciated over time. Then, as if the bag had suddenly become too slippery, I fumbled it. The Birkin slipped from my hands and hit the marble floor with a soft but definite thump. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Victoria stared at her bag on the floor with the kind of horror most people reserve for watching car accidents. I gasped and apologized profusely, quickly scooping up the bag and handing it back to her. I explained that I was just not used to handling such expensive things. My regular canvas bag was way easier to grip because it had handles that actually felt like handles, not these tiny delicate straps. Plus, my bag could carry way more stuff. I could fit my groceries in my bag. Could you fit groceries in a Birkin? Victoria snatched the bag back and inspected it from every angle, looking for damage with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond. Finding none, she carefully set it on the chair beside her, far from my reach. She informed me in a voice tight with controlled patience that this was not a grocery bag. This was luxury. This was craftsmanship. This was heritage. This was something that required respect and careful handling. This was what separated people with taste and refinement from people who simply did not understand quality. I nodded enthusiastically and said I totally understood what she meant. It was kind of like how people lined up and paid crazy amounts of money for the new iPhone every year, right? They did not actually need the new features. The old phone worked fine, but they wanted the status symbol. They wanted other people to see that they could afford the latest and greatest. The Birkin was the same thing, just with handbags instead of phones. It was about showing other people that you had money to spend on things that were not really necessary, but were socially impressive. The silence that followed my observation was profound. Victoria's face went through several interesting color changes. Ethan looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and hide. The caterer, who had been approaching with the 5th course, actually stopped mid-step and retreated back to the kitchen. I maintained my expression of innocent interest, waiting to see how Victoria would respond to having her precious status symbol compared to consumer electronics. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. She explained slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dim child, that comparing a Birkin to an iPhone demonstrated a fundamental lack of understanding about luxury goods. An iPhone was mass-produced technology that lost value the moment you took it out of the box. A Birkin was handmade by skilled artisans with a waiting list that could stretch years. Each bag took over 20 hours to make. The leather came from the finest sources. The craftsmanship was unparalleled. This was not about showing off. This was about appreciating quality and beauty and tradition. I nodded along to her explanation, then asked if that meant the bag was old, because usually new things worked better than old things did. They not? Like, my phone from this year was way better than my phone from 3 years ago. So if this kind of bag making had been around for a long time, did that mean the old ones were not as good? Or were the old ones better because they were more vintage? I was genuinely confused about the logic. Victoria looked like she was developing a headache. The 5th course finally arrived, an elaborate dessert construction involving chocolate and gold leaf. Victoria barely touched hers. She had spent the entire meal talking about herself, her possessions, her experiences, her accomplishments. But my questions and observations, delivered with such apparent innocence, had managed to undercut each boast, to question each assumption, to reduce each symbol of status to its basic components. I had not been overtly rude or hostile. I had simply been relentlessly naive and practical, asking the kind of questions that exposed the hollowness at the center of Victoria's entire value system. As coffee was served, Victoria made one more attempt to establish her dominance. She mentioned that she was considering purchasing a private jet. Nothing too large, just a small one for quick trips between her various properties. She was tired of dealing with commercial airline schedules, even in first class. Ethan perked up at this, clearly hoping that this topic might be safe ground. He asked her about the logistics of owning a plane. Victoria launched into an explanation of the costs, the staffing requirements, the freedom and flexibility it would provide. Then my phone rang. The ringtone was deliberately cheerful, a pop song that was currently popular on the radio. I glanced at the screen and saw it was my boss, our company CEO. This was the moment. This was the carefully planned climax of my entire performance. I looked at the phone, looked at Victoria and Ethan, and made a show of considering whether to answer. Then I pressed the decline button and set the phone face down on the table. Victoria's eyes widened in genuine shock. For the first time all evening, she seemed to forget her careful composure. She demanded to know if that had been my boss calling. I confirmed cheerfully that it was. She asked why on earth I had not answered. Did I not realize that ignoring a call from my superior could get me fired? Did I not understand how the workplace worked? What could possibly be more important than being available when my boss needed me? I shrugged and explained my company's philosophy about work-life balance. It was after 6 o'clock. I was off the clock. Unless there was a genuine emergency, like the building was literally on fire, I did not take work calls after hours. My company actually had a policy about this. They did not want employees burning out. They wanted us to have lives outside of work. Besides, I was just an administrative assistant. Nothing I did was so urgent that it could not wait until Monday morning. Whatever my boss wanted, it would still be there when I got back to the office. Victoria leaned forward, her carefully maintained facade cracking completely. She told me I was being foolish. She said that if I wanted to get ahead, if I wanted to be successful, if I wanted to amount to anything in my career, I had to be available. I had to show dedication. I had to prove my commitment. Success required sacrifice. Success required putting work first always. She had built her empire by being available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. She never turned off her phone. She never declined a call. That was the price of achievement. I let her finish her lecture, watching her with an expression that had slowly shifted from friendly interest to something more calculating. When she paused to take a breath, I asked her a simple question. What exactly was she sacrificing for? What was the point of all that money and all those possessions and all that success, if she never had time to enjoy any of it? What was the point of having luxury apartments all over the world if she was always working? What good was a yacht if she was too busy to sail it? When was the last time she had actually felt happy rather than simply feeling important? Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but I was not finished. I told her that during our entire dinner together, she had spent over 2 hours talking. In those 2 hours, she had provided detailed descriptions of the value of her apartment, the value of her yacht, the value of her bag, the value of her jewelry, the value of everything she owned. She had talked about prices and brands and status symbols, but she had not once asked Ethan about his life. She had not asked about his work, his health, his happiness, his dreams, his fears. She had not asked him a single question that demonstrated any interest in him as a person, rather than as an audience for her performance. She had not asked me anything at all except to confirm that I had heard and understood her boasts. The silence that fell was different from the earlier silences. This one felt dangerous. Victoria stared at me like I had suddenly revealed myself to be a completely different species. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. I continued in the same measured tone. I asked her what actually made her happy. Was it the apartment? Was it the bag? Was it the yacht? Was it the jewelry? Or was it the imagined envy of other people when they saw her possessions? Did she even know anymore? Could she separate her identity from her net worth? Could she distinguish between being valued and being valuable? Victoria found her voice, and it came out sharp with fury. She told me I had no right to question her choices or her life. I was nobody. I was nothing. I was a secretary, an assistant, a person who could not even be bothered to answer a phone call from my boss. How dare I sit at her table in her home eating her food and presume to judge her? How dare I suggest that she did not care about her brother? How dare I imply that her success meant nothing? What did I know about achieving anything? What had I ever accomplished that gave me the right to criticize someone who had actually made something of herself? I stood up slowly, pushing back from the table. The movement was deliberate and controlled. Something in my posture must have changed because both Victoria and Ethan went very still, watching me with new attention. I smoothed down my cheap jeans and looked Victoria directly in the eyes. When I spoke, my voice had lost all traces of the naive office worker I had been playing all evening. It was cool, professional, and absolutely certain. I told her she was right about one thing. She was completely wrong about who I was. I was not a secretary. I was not an administrative assistant. I was not some minor functionary shuffling papers in a generic office. I was the director of strategic development at Technova Solutions, a company valued at over $2 billion. I managed a department of 32 highly skilled professionals. I oversaw projects worth tens of millions of dollars. My annual salary was $180,000, not including performance bonuses, stock options, and benefits. Last year, my total compensation package had exceeded $250,000. The color drained from Victoria's face. She looked at Ethan for confirmation, for denial, for any sign that I was lying or exaggerating. But Ethan met her eyes and nodded slowly. He told her that every word I had just said was true. He said I was the most brilliant, accomplished, driven woman he had ever met. He said that some of the projects I had led had been featured in Forbes and TechCrunch. He said my team had won industry awards for innovation. He said he had hidden the truth from her because he had been afraid of exactly this moment, afraid of her jealousy and her need to diminish anyone who might challenge her position as the family success story. I held up a hand to stop him. This was my moment, not his. I turned back to Victoria and continued. I told her that her $12,000 Birkin bag was beautiful, and I meant that sincerely. But I could buy a dozen of them without checking my bank balance if I wanted to. I could buy 100 of them. I could dedicate an entire room in my house to Birkin bags in every color if that was how I chose to spend my money. But I did not do that because I had learned something that Victoria apparently never had. Possessions were not achievements. Price tags were not personality traits. Status symbols were not the same thing as self-worth. I told her that I had spent the entire evening pretending to be someone I was not. I had dressed down, dumbed down, made myself smaller and less threatening because Ethan had asked me to. He had asked me to do this because he knew from a lifetime of experience exactly how she would react to meeting someone who was her equal or possibly her superior in the measures she cared about. He had known that she could not handle it. He had known that she would make everyone miserable if she felt threatened. And he had been right, had he not? Even thinking I was just a simple office worker, she had been condescending and dismissive. She had treated me like a curiosity, someone to educate and look down upon. I asked her to imagine how she would have treated me if Ethan had told her the truth from the beginning. If she had walked into this dinner knowing I made more money than she probably did from her real estate ventures. If she had known I managed bigger projects and had more professional respect. If she had known I was her equal in every way that she measured success. Would she have been kind? Would she have been welcoming? Or would she have spent the evening trying to tear me down to find flaws, to reassert her dominance in whatever way she could? Victoria tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I told her that the saddest part of the entire evening was not her treatment of me. I was tough. I had dealt with much worse in boardrooms and negotiations. The saddest part was watching her completely ignore her brother. Ethan clearly loved her. He wanted her approval desperately. He wanted a relationship with his sister. But she had spent 2.5 hours talking about herself without once asking him a meaningful question. She had not asked how his work was going. She had not asked if he was happy. She had not asked about his dreams or his fears or his life. She had treated him as an audience member, someone whose only function was to witness and admire her performance. I told her that I had conducted an experiment tonight. I had given her exactly what she seemed to want, someone she could feel superior to, someone she could educate and impress. And in response, she had revealed exactly who she was when she thought she was talking to someone beneath her. She had been dismissive, condescending, and completely self-absorbed. She had demonstrated that her sense of worth was entirely dependent on feeling better than other people. She needed someone to look down on. She needed someone to feel sorry for. She needed constant validation that she was special, important, successful. And that need had made her blind to everything that actually mattered. I asked her one final question. When she went to bed at night in her luxury apartment overlooking the Bosphorus, surrounded by all her beautiful, expensive things, who did she talk to? Who did she share her victories with? Not the public performance victories, but the small private ones, who comforted her when she failed, who loved her not for what she owned or what she had achieved, but for who she actually was. Underneath all the status symbols, I told her I genuinely hoped she had good answers to those questions. Because if all she had was her possessions and her bank balance, then she was the poorest person I had ever met despite all her money. The silence that followed my words seemed to stretch forever. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of shock and something that might have been shame. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she had been completely outmaneuvered. Someone she had dismissed as insignificant had systematically demolished every assumption she had made. Someone she had treated with casual contempt had revealed themselves to be not just her equal, but her superior in the one skill that actually mattered in life: the ability to see clearly and value appropriately. I picked up my cheap canvas bag from where it rested against my chair. I told Victoria that I hoped the next time she met someone, she would try to see their value as a human being, rather than making assumptions based on their clothes, or their job title, or their apparent place in her imagined social hierarchy. I told her that true success was not measured in real estate holdings, or designer bags, or luxury vehicles. True success was measured in the quality of your relationships, in the depth of your connections with other people, in your capacity for empathy and kindness, and genuine interest in lives beyond your own. I told her that I actually pitied her. She had achieved so much in material terms, but she seemed to have lost or never developed the ability to connect with people authentically. Everything was a performance. Everything was about status and dominance and establishing superiority. She could not just have dinner with her brother. She had to turn it into an opportunity to showcase her wealth and accomplishments. She could not just meet his wife. She had to establish dominance over someone she perceived as a rival for Ethan's attention and affection. It was exhausting just watching her, and I could not imagine how exhausting it must be to actually live that way. I turned to Ethan and told him it was time to go. He stood immediately, relief and pride visible on his face. He thanked Victoria for dinner in a tone that was polite but distant. Something had shifted in him during my speech. Some loyalty had been transferred. Some illusion had been shattered. He took my hand and held it tightly, making a clear statement about where his allegiance lay. We walked toward the elevator together, presenting a united front. As I pressed the button to call the elevator, I turned back one last time. Victoria was still sitting at the table, surrounded by the remnants of the elaborate meal she had orchestrated. The expensive china, the crystal glasses, the silver flatware, the fresh flowers, her beautiful gown, her perfect hair, her carefully applied makeup, her precious Birkin bag on the chair beside her, a symbol of everything she valued and everything she had gotten wrong. She looked small, suddenly diminished, not by me, but by the revelation of her own emptiness. I told her that I was not her enemy. I was not competing with her. I did not need to tear her down to build myself up. But I also would not allow her to diminish me or disrespect my relationship with Ethan. If she wanted to be part of our lives going forward, she would need to learn to see people, not as props, in her ongoing performance of success. She would need to learn to ask questions instead of delivering monologues. She would need to learn that love and respect could not be bought or displayed or posted on social media. They had to be earned through consistent, genuine, empathetic behavior. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Ethan and I stepped inside. As the doors began to close, I saw Victoria finally move. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Whether she was crying or laughing or simply overwhelmed, I could not tell. The doors closed, cutting off my view. Ethan immediately pulled me into a tight embrace, apologizing over and over. He said he had been wrong to ask me to hide who I was. He said he had been wrong to prioritize his sister's feelings over my dignity. He said watching me transform from the fake, naive office worker into my true self had been like watching a magic trick in reverse, except instead of concealment, it was revelation. He said he had been afraid of Victoria his entire life, afraid of her judgment, her criticism, her ability to make him feel small. But watching me stand up to her without fear or hesitation had shown him that his fear had given her power she did not actually deserve. Victoria was not a monster. She was just a deeply insecure person who had built an elaborate facade of success to hide her emotional emptiness. And that facade had just been demolished by someone she had foolishly underestimated. We drove home in relative silence, both of us processing what had just happened. When we arrived at our loft, I finally changed out of my terrible disguise and back into comfortable clothes that actually fit. I scrubbed my face and brushed out my hair. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt a profound sense of relief. Playing that character had been more draining than I had anticipated. Deliberately making myself seem less intelligent, less capable, less aware had required constant effort. I was glad to be myself again. Ethan and I stayed up late talking about the evening, about his relationship with Victoria, about what would happen next. He told me stories I had never heard before, about growing up with Victoria as the golden child, how their parents had held her up as the standard of success, how he had always felt like he was competing in a race he could never win, how Victoria's approval had become the metric by which he measured his own worth. He said that somewhere along the way he had internalized her values without questioning whether they were actually values worth having. He told me that seeing me dismantle Victoria's worldview with such precision and control had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own complicity in her behavior. By hiding my success from her, by asking me to make myself smaller, he had been reinforcing the idea that Victoria's ego was more important than reality. He had been enabling her delusion that she was somehow superior to everyone around her. He had been protecting her from the growth that only comes through being challenged. I told him that I understood why he had done it. Family dynamics were complicated. The patterns established in childhood ran deep. It was hard to break free from the role you had been assigned by your family, especially when that role came with love and approval attached to it. But I also told him that going forward, I would not hide who I was for anyone, including his sister. If Victoria could not handle the reality of my existence and my success, that was her problem to solve, not mine to manage. The next few days passed quietly. We heard nothing from Victoria, no angry phone calls, no defensive text messages, nothing. Ethan reported that his mother had called confused because Victoria had checked out of the penthouse early and returned to Istanbul ahead of schedule. She had told their mother that something urgent had come up with her business, but she had been vague about the details. Their mother suspected something had happened at dinner, but did not press for information. I returned to work and threw myself into the European expansion project I had been managing. The team was at a critical juncture, negotiating with 3 potential partner companies simultaneously. It required careful diplomacy, strategic thinking, and the ability to keep multiple complex threads in my mind at once. This was the work I loved, the work that challenged me and fulfilled me. After the strange experience of deliberately dumbing myself down for Victoria's benefit, it felt especially good to be back in an environment where my intelligence and competence were valued and respected. On Thursday of that week, I was in my office reviewing financial projections when my phone buzzed with a social media notification. Ethan had posted something and tagged me. I opened the app with curiosity and felt a slow smile spread across my face. The post was a photo from the previous month taken at a technology conference where I had received an award for strategic innovation. In the photo, I was standing on stage, in a sharp navy suit, holding a crystal trophy with a banner behind me that clearly displayed my name and title in large letters. I looked confident, professional, and successful. The caption was simple but pointed, "Proud of my brilliant wife who always knows what really matters." Below the photo were already dozens of comments from colleagues, friends, and family members congratulating me on the award. And there, tagged carefully in the post, was Victoria's profile. Ethan had made sure she would see it. He had made sure everyone in their family and social circle would see it. He had corrected the false narrative he had created, and he had done it publicly. I called him immediately. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He asked if I had seen the post. I told him I had, and I asked him what had prompted it. He said he had been thinking about what I had said to Victoria, about authenticity and pride, and refusing to hide who you were. He said that by asking me to conceal my success, he had been complicit in Victoria's toxicity. He had been sending the message that her feelings mattered more than my accomplishments. He had been teaching her that she could control how other people presented themselves to accommodate her insecurities. He said he was done with that. He was done protecting Victoria from reality. He was done enabling her delusion that she was the only successful person in the family. He was done pretending that her opinion was the only one that mattered. From now on, he was going to be proud of his wife publicly and explicitly. If Victoria could not handle that, if it made her uncomfortable or jealous or angry, she would have to work through those feelings herself. He was no longer going to sacrifice his integrity or my dignity to manage her emotional fragility. I felt something tight in my chest finally release. This was what I had needed even more than the confrontation with Victoria. I had needed Ethan to choose us, to choose our partnership over his sister's expectations, to choose honesty over peacekeeping, to choose pride in what we had built together over fear of family conflict. The fact that he had done it publicly made it even more meaningful. He was not just telling me privately that he supported me. He was showing the world, including Victoria, that his loyalty was to his wife and their relationship. Over the following days, the post accumulated more comments and likes. Several of Ethan's family members commented with congratulations and pride. His mother sent a private message asking why she had not known about my award and my actual job title. Ethan explained the situation to her honestly, including his own role in hiding the truth. His mother was disappointed in both Ethan for his deception and Victoria for her behavior. She said she would be having a conversation with Victoria about treating people with respect, regardless of their position or status. Victoria herself never commented on the post. She never called or texted. For weeks, she maintained complete radio silence. Then, about a month after the dinner, Ethan received an email from her. It was formal and brief. She apologized for her behavior at dinner. She said she had been going through a difficult time and had taken it out on people who did not deserve it. She said she needed to work on herself and her relationships. She said she hoped eventually they could rebuild their sibling relationship on a more honest foundation. She did not mention me specifically, but the apology was clearly meant to extend to both of us. Ethan showed me the email and asked what I thought. I told him that it was a start. Whether it represented genuine growth or just damage control was something only time would tell. Victoria had spent her entire adult life building her identity around external markers of success and superiority. Changing that fundamental orientation would not happen quickly or easily. But the fact that she had apologized at all, even in such a restrained way, suggested that my words had landed somewhere deep. She had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about herself, and that kind of confrontation could be the beginning of real change. I told Ethan that if he wanted to maintain a relationship with his sister, I would support that. But I also told him that I would not participate in any more charades or performances designed to protect her ego. If we had dinner with Victoria again, I would show up as myself. I would dress in my normal clothes. I would talk about my work honestly. I would not diminish myself to make her comfortable. She would have to learn to handle the reality of who I was, or she would have to stay out of our lives. Those were the only two options I was willing to accept. Ethan agreed completely. He said that our relationship with Victoria going forward would be based on honesty and mutual respect, or it would not exist at all. He had spent too many years trying to manage her feelings and placate her insecurities. He was done with that exhausting dance. If she wanted to be part of our lives, she would have to accept us as we actually were, not as characters, in whatever narrative she preferred. As the months passed, our life settled into a new normal. Work continued to be fulfilling and challenging. The European expansion project moved forward successfully, resulting in a major acquisition that positioned our company for significant growth. My team was promoted and celebrated. I received another raise and additional stock options. The board began talking about creating a VP position for me, a promotion that would put me in the executive leadership tier of the company. Ethan and I grew closer than we had been in years. The crisis with Victoria had forced us to confront some difficult truths about our relationship, about communication and honesty and mutual respect. We had come through it stronger. We talked more openly about our feelings and our needs. We supported each other's ambitions without reservation or qualification. We built a partnership based on equality and admiration, not on hiding parts of ourselves to keep the peace. Victoria remained largely absent from our lives. She sent occasional messages to Ethan, usually brief updates about her business or her travels. The tone was friendlier than before, but still distant. She never suggested another visit. She never asked to video chat. It was as if she needed time and space to work through whatever revelations our confrontation had sparked. Ethan was sad about the distance, but also relieved not to be constantly managing her expectations and emotions. Then, about 6 months after the dinner, something unexpected happened. Victoria called Ethan and asked if she could visit Austin again. She said she wanted to apologize in person. She said she had been working with a therapist to address some issues around self-worth and relationships. She said she understood if we did not want to see her, but she hoped we would give her a chance to make amends properly. Ethan looked at me questioningly when he relayed this request. I considered it carefully and then nodded. I was willing to give her a chance, though I remained cautious about her motives and her capacity for genuine change. The second dinner was completely different from the first. Victoria arrived at our loft dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse. No designer gown, no elaborate jewelry. She looked nervous as she greeted us, and her hug for Ethan seemed more genuine than performative. When she turned to me, she extended her hand formally and said it was good to see me again. There was no air kissing, no condescension, just simple courtesy. We had ordered takeout from a local Thai restaurant rather than arranging anything elaborate. We ate at our regular dining table with our everyday dishes. The entire atmosphere was relaxed and informal, the complete opposite of the staged performance at the penthouse. Victoria seemed uncomfortable at first, clearly out of her element without the props and scenery of luxury to hide behind. But gradually she relaxed as the evening progressed. She apologized sincerely for her behavior at the first dinner. She said she had built her entire identity around being successful and impressive, and meeting me had threatened that identity in ways she had not been prepared to handle. She said that when Ethan had told her I was just an office worker, she had felt safe and superior. She had been looking forward to being the accomplished one, the impressive one, the one with stories worth telling. Having that illusion shattered had forced her to confront how empty her life actually was beneath all the expensive trappings. She said that after I left the penthouse that night, she had sat alone surrounded by all her carefully arranged status symbols and realized that she was desperately lonely. She had possessions but no real friends. She had accomplishments but no one to share them with authentically. She had money but no genuine connections. She had been so focused on accumulating evidence of her success that she had forgotten to build a life worth living. My words had cut deep because they had been true, and she had known it even as she sat there in denial. She told Ethan that she was sorry for making him feel like her approval was conditional on him and everyone around him being less successful than she was. She said she understood now how toxic that had been, how it had damaged their relationship and forced him into an impossible position with me. She said she wanted to rebuild their sibling bond on a healthier foundation, one where they could both be successful and supportive of each other rather than competitive. She turned to me and thanked me for holding up the mirror, even though it had been painful and humiliating at the time. She said no one had ever called her out so directly or effectively. Most people either envied her or enabled her, but no one had cared enough to show her what she was becoming. She said she did not expect me to forgive her immediately or to trust her. She just wanted me to know that she was working on changing, and she hoped eventually we might be able to have a relationship based on mutual respect. I listened to all of this carefully, watching for signs of manipulation or performance. But Victoria seemed genuinely different. The edge of competition was gone. The need to dominate the conversation was absent. She asked questions. She listened to answers. When Ethan talked about his work, she engaged with genuine interest, rather than waiting for her turn to talk about herself. When I mentioned a project I was working on, she asked thoughtful follow-up questions, rather than trying to one-up me with her own accomplishments. It was not perfect. Old patterns emerged occasionally. She started to launch into a story about her apartment in Istanbul, then caught herself and asked if we wanted to hear about it rather than assuming we did. She mentioned the value of something she had purchased, then stopped and apologized for always talking about money. She was clearly working hard to change ingrained habits, and the effort showed. But the important thing was that she was trying. She was aware of her patterns and actively fighting against them. As the evening wound down, I realized that I felt something unexpected toward Victoria. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but something softer than the cold anger I had carried since our first meeting. Maybe it was empathy. She was clearly struggling with fundamental questions about identity and worth, questions that did not have easy answers. She had built her entire life on a foundation of external validation, and now she was trying to rebuild on something more solid. That was hard work, and it took courage to even attempt it. When Victoria left, she hugged Ethan warmly and shook my hand again. She said she hoped we could do this again sometime, but she understood if we needed more time. Ethan told her he would be in touch. After she left, he turned to me and asked what I thought. I told him that I thought Victoria was genuinely trying to change, and that was worth acknowledging. Whether she succeeded in the long term remained to be seen. Personal transformation was not a straight line. There would be backsliding and regression, but if she was serious about doing the work, if she stayed in therapy and kept pushing herself to be more authentic and empathetic, then maybe eventually we could have a real relationship with her. Over the following year, we saw Victoria occasionally. She visited Austin a few more times, and we video chatted with her monthly. The improvement in her behavior was gradual but real. She talked less about her possessions and more about her experiences. She asked questions about our lives with apparent genuine interest. She expressed pride in both Ethan's work and mine without the undertone of competition. She even started talking about feeling lonely and wondering if she had spent so much time building her career that she had neglected to build meaningful relationships. I never told Victoria the full extent of my planning for that first dinner. She knew I had deliberately dressed down and played a role, but she did not know how carefully I had calculated every word and action. She did not know that I had spent hours considering how to most effectively expose her values and force her to confront them. Part of me wanted her to understand just how methodically she had been outmaneuvered, but another part of me recognized that some things were better left unsaid. The lesson had landed. The change had begun. There was no need to rub salt in old wounds. As I sat on my balcony one evening, about a year after that fateful dinner, watching the sunset paint the Austin skyline in shades of orange and gold, I reflected on what the whole experience had taught me. I had always known I was capable and intelligent and successful, but that night with Victoria had taught me something new about myself. It had taught me that I was willing to fight for my dignity and my relationship, even if it meant creating conflict in Ethan's family. It had taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to show them the truth about themselves, even when that truth is painful. Most importantly, it had taught me that respect had to be demanded, not requested. Victoria would never have changed her behavior if I had simply asked her politely to treat me better. She would have dismissed that request as weakness. But by systematically demonstrating her own hollowness, by using her own values against her, by showing her that everything she thought made her superior was actually evidence of her poverty of spirit, I had forced her to confront truths she could not ignore or rationalize away. Ethan came out onto the balcony and handed me a glass of wine. He sat beside me and we watched the sun disappear below the horizon together. He told me that Victoria had called him earlier that day. She had signed up for a series of workshops on emotional intelligence and authentic relationship building. She had asked if he thought they were a good idea, or if she was wasting her time. He had told her they sounded like exactly what she needed. She had laughed a genuine, unguarded laugh, and said that a year ago, she would never have admitted she needed help with anything. She said that facing her own emptiness had been the hardest and best thing that had ever happened to her. I leaned against Ethan and felt profound gratitude for the journey we had been on together. The crisis with Victoria could have broken us. If Ethan had insisted on protecting his sister's ego indefinitely, if he had refused to choose our relationship over family peace, we might not have survived. But instead, the crisis had strengthened us. It had forced us to communicate more honestly. It had taught us both that love meant supporting each other's full, authentic selves, not asking either partner to diminish themselves for someone else's comfort. In the end, the revenge I had taken was not about humiliating Victoria or proving my superiority. It was about teaching her a lesson that she desperately needed to learn, even if she might never admit it. It was about showing her the difference between what glitters and what truly shines. It was about holding up a mirror and forcing her to see herself clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. Whether she chose to learn from that reflection was up to her. I had done my part. I had stood my ground. I had protected my relationship. I had valued myself enough to refuse being undervalued by anyone else. And that in itself was the greatest victory of all.